Hello, welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Ilana Levin, and this is a comics podcast. This is a comics podcast for people who love superheroes and love fan comics and can look at the superhero stories we enjoy with a critical eye. Today I've got a really exciting guest joining me, someone I've wanted on the show for a while, and she's here, hooray! Stephanie Williams is a comic historian and pop culture critic for notable publications such as SYFYFANGRRLS, Marvel, the AV Club, Nerdist, Den of Geek, and Rotten Tomatoes. She is currently a content producer for What to Watch. Stephanie is also a comic creator with 3 ongoing webcomics: Parenthood Activate, But What If Though, and Living Heroes. She made her Marvel debut with a short story featuring Monica Rambeau in Marvel's Voices, Legacy. Welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. I love that we were able to get you right at the juncture of when you have a new story coming out from Marvel's Voices, and everybody is just like, I feel like there's been a big spike in people paying attention to your wonderful fan comic, Living Heroes. And you've got more comic stuff coming up soon, too. So this is like, the moment is right.
Yeah, and the moment is definitely right. Because it was like back in February, it was like, wow, if things keep going the way that they are, I am probably going to be without a voice by May. So I'm working my way to that.
Well, I know that we wanted to talk about WandaVision a little bit, too, which we'll hold for the end because I have that in my show flow. But I loved your writing on that and really appreciated it, too. But I want to start from the beginning, which was, how did you get into comics, both as a reader and fan, and then like as someone who actually makes comics themselves?
So as a reader, it's kind of a little sporadic. So I got interested in comic characters through my older brother, who played a lot of fighting games, so Mortal Kombat, and of course Street Fighter. So there was Marvel versus Capcom, and that's how I kind of got introduced to Spider-Man and the X-Men characters and whatnot. And then from there, the animated series that would air on Fox on the weekend, Saturday morning. Mm-hmm. And then from there, it's a mix of picking up comics, not really knowing what they were. My grandmother loved going to thrift shops before it was, the cool thing to do. And I would always go back to where like the books and everything were, and I would thumb through the comics. So I remember like taking a Superman comic home and like just kind of thumbing through it. It wasn't until I discovered the Archie comics, like the digest specifically, because they would be at the grocery store, that I really started reading comics like as regularly as I would novels and stuff. I don't know why that is. Something about Archie I just really loved, and then I remember seeing Batman with the long ears and just finding that like that whole suit at the time in the art aesthetically pleasing. And then that's kind of how I really got into Cape Comics and backtracked and worked my way back to Avengers and X-Men and all of that. Now as a creator, comics were something that I would make while when I was in school. Actually, I remember I think it was first grade, I won the local art show or whatever, because I had made a small comic about a dinosaur eating my first grade teacher. And I don't know why I even made that story, because she was amazing. She was actually the sweetest teacher ever, and I adored her. But she thought the comic was so funny and had submitted it. And I ended up taking first place with that. So from there, like I just really kind of got into art. Like whenever there were like art classes available at my school through extracurricular activities or whatever, like I would ask my parents like, hey, can you put me in this? So I used to actually draw. I still do from time to time, but that was something that I was like really big into, and I was like, oh wait, I guess I'll draw books or I'll draw comics. And it wasn't until I got really comfortable with writing and found out that I actually had a knack for it, that I started considering, well, maybe I can write comics or write novels. So fast forward, you grow up, you go to college, and you like waste thousands of dollars on a degree that you barely use. So I did that. Thought I wanted to become a doctor, but fell in love with research. And from there, once I graduated, I got a job in an electron microscopy lab, which I didn't even know what that was until after I graduated. And I became an electron microscopist. And I know that sounds fancy, but
I don't know what that is either.
Yeah. So my day-to-day was working with pathologists who are doctors who, figure out what the disease process is that's going on. If you have something like lupus or diabetes, hypertension, cancer, all of that. So as an electron microscopist, I would process these biopsies, and it was like a whole step of like embedding tissue in resin, or you might know as like plastic, and using this very like high-tech machine, ultramicrotome. It looks simple, but it's really precise. Like you're cutting pieces of a biopsy off that is as thin as, I don't think like 10 microns or something like that. It's like very, very thin. It's see-through, basically, almost basically
Wow.
transparent. So those go on very, very small copper, I guess like copper plates, and it's put into this giant microscope that looks like something out of a Marvel comic or DC comic, something Reed Richards would definitely have. And from there, you can see the ultrastructures of the tissue. So I loved that job. I got very good at it, like to the point where there were a few times where, the doctor thought that the diagnosis was, one thing, and then because I was like very thorough at my job, I would find something else, and then I would just change the entire diagnosis and the treatment and everything. And it felt really great to do that. Like, that's helping, help save lives, better someone's life, or extend their life expectancy. So I enjoyed that. What I did not enjoy was the environment. It was rather toxic. So that after a while began to wear on me. And after I had my son, I was dealing with a lot of postpartum depression on top of just flat out depression from my job. And I don't know, like during that time, I leaned back into the things that used to bring me, immense comfort, and that was reading comics. And through that, I was like, why did I, let go of the dream of writing? Writing stories and sharing my stories or putting them in comics. So I ended up getting back on Twitter, and I'd heard from folks like that's a great space, that or Tumblr, to kind of find folks who are of the same mind, or like, just a community of people who are trying to do the same thing that you are. And I don't know, like I just got online and just started talking about the stuff that I like, which was mostly comics or, whatever TV shows or movies I was watching. And that turned into podcasting, which led me to my own podcast, which was the Lemonade Show. I talked about comics that I was reading, shows I was watching, movies, such like that. That led to Misty Knight's Uninformed Afro, which we covered all black superheroines, whether they were DC, Image, Marvel, Indie, didn't matter. We covered and highlighted them because I felt that
was a
something
really
that was
fun podcast.
Yes.
I remember that one.
I miss it so much. And when we got invited to the Kennedy Center for the 2018 Art Summit, I think that was the moment. I was still at this job that I was beginning to despise, or at that point was despising. And it was in that moment I was like, there's something here. If I can get invited to DC to talk at something like the Art Summit at the Kennedy Center, then I can definitely figure this out. Like I can figure out how to, find a way to make a living off of this so that I can leave this job that I hate so much. So when the Misty Knight's Uninformed Afro podcast ended abruptly, I was kind of stuck. because I was like, wow, this was really going great. So what do I do now? And it dawned on me, hey, you've been doing research for this podcast, filling out show notes, all of that. Not saying that it's the same thing as writing, features or anything like that, but hey, you can figure it out. And I did. So I pitched 2 stories to Fangirls, because one had been on my mind since I had seen Black Panther, maybe even before then, and that was to cover the evolution of the Dora Milaje. And I did that. It got a lot of eyes on it, and a lot of folks saying, "Well, this was great." And from there, it was just the rest is history. For a while, until one day I got way more comfortable in my writing abilities and just my voice in general, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna make comics. I don't know how, but I'm gonna figure it out. And I thought about how I often share, parenting ups and downs on Twitter and how those often go viral. And I thought, well, these are clearly stories that people want to hear or find interesting and funny. So, put it in comic form. I'm already using images and memes to help tell a story whenever I share one on Twitter. So what is the difference between that and a comic? And in fact, comic would be even easier because I don't have to try to contain a story to just what's in the picture. I can actually, write down what I would like to see there and how I envision it to match my words and to tell the story to the best of my ability. And Parenthood Activate became a thing, and from there, But What If Though, and then after that, Living Heroes, an entire Kickstarter, which I still can't believe was funded in 24 hours. And then from there,
that is amazing.
It's because it's so niche. I felt like it was really niche. I didn't expect that. And then after spending almost an entire year worried about Marvel emailing me from their legal team for cease and desist, to get an email from them asking me, hey, would you like to write a story in an upcoming comic? That's still surreal to me. Because not that it was never the goal, but when I created Living Heroes, it was never with the intent of, ooh, this might catch Marvel's eye. I just really wanted to, pay love to characters that I've loved and related to for a long time and put them in a setting in a way that, I felt that I've always wanted to see as a Black woman, as a Black queer woman. So I did that, and they noticed. And again, I don't know, it's just still surreal. That and Parenthood Activate, which just really took me back.
Wow. The thing is, to me, there's such an obvious audience for something like Living Heroes because, people love reading stories about the superhero characters that they identify with or grew up with or any of the above, interacting with each other as friends and dealing with their interpersonal situations. And that is that's a sitcom sort of setting,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's so many fan works that are at that those themes that to me I'm like, oh my God, of course this is a huge hit. But so many of the things they haven't been as good as this. the end result of this is extremely high quality and funny and beautiful. Really knocking it out of the ballpark, not just the concept but the execution.
The execution, because I often think back about it and just the synergy. I was at a baby shower, and I was scrolling Twitter. I think we were in between games or something. And I saw that O'Neill had on her Twitter commissions open. And I remember that she had did some artwork for a friend's Patreon, and I really loved it. So because of Parenthood Activate and just kind of getting the confidence from that, I slid into her DMs and I was like, hey, I have an idea for this webcomic that is going to play with other IPs, but put those IPs in different settings that, kind of like sketch comedy. And she loved it and kind of told her the idea for the first one, which was Batman. One of the running jokes on Twitter, along with him beating up petty felons, is, he's the master of being prepared. He has contingency plans for everything. So just kind of playing with that, the fact that, he's in the Justice League and so is Vixen, and just kind of just thinking about the dynamics in the workplace for Black women, I thought it would be funny if, every time Vixen came in with a new hairstyle, that Bruce thought that it was part of her power set for whatever reason. So that was kind of the punchline of it. And after I saw the way that Aaron had just executed the script, I was like, okay, this works. And the fact that her art complements my sense of humor so well, and also just like her sense of humor in general complements mine. I'm not surprised that Living Heroes turned out the way that it did, but I just know that it wouldn't have been possible without her or our colorist Christina. Those colors just pop off the page.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. And it's really like detailed, and it matches the art style also.
Yeah. So, I don't every time I just think about it, just the whole process and the fact that it came from a one-off. I was watching Living Single, and I think reading a comic at the same time, because I often do that. I don't know why, but one of my favorite pastimes is to have something on in the background that I've probably watched a lot, but to read comics as I do it, and that's where a lot of my ideas come from, because the mashup is happening organically, as I'm reading something and watching something at the same time. And I think I was doing some research or something like that on the Dark Phoenix saga, and I remember Misty Knight and Jean were roommates, so they lived in New York. It's already expensive. I'm pretty sure it was expensive then. So what would happen, if Jean just so happened to die again and Misty was left without a roommate? She, for whatever reason, couldn't find another one. Okay, so what if she moves in with, Monica Rambeau and Storm? Monica's up there living for whatever reason, maybe closer to, Adam, and Storm is from, Harlem, so yeah, she would be in New York somewhere. So Living Single takes place there, and I was like, yeah, this works. Let me see how this would go. And I was thinking of a fourth, and She-Hulk was just obvious, not because, because she's a lawyer. And I was it's the lowest hanging fruit, but also I know it's questionable, but I am a fan of John Byrne's sensational She-Hulk. I just I don't know, for that character, I just feel that goofiness just really pairs well. And that's another reason why I was yeah, She-Hulk would be perfect for this. So did the first one, it was received well. Did a second one because I just really wanted to make the meme of Sue Richards looking like the young woman from divorce court or couples court, when she got caught cheating because her lover just pretty much, spilled all the beans while he was on the stand. Because one of my favorite things is the fact that you really can't get a read sometime on Reed and Sue's relationship, and the fact that Neymar is sometimes involved. And I'm just yeah, that's perfect. And I can tie this right back into Living Heroes, because Misty Knight would be watching that because she loves her daytime TV. And, She-Hulk would be on that show because, extra money in her pocket. And let's introduce Sam Wilson, who I always felt would be great if he gave himbo energy. So, because he reminded me of Overton, and I was just yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. the equivalents and the parallels, and I'm someone who's watched Living Single. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but obviously, I'm of a certain age where it's a pretty safe assumption to have made. But I don't know the show inside out, so I'm sure that there's some particular parallels that I didn't quite grab. But it exists in that sort of world and tone so well.
Yeah. And I think this just goes into Living Heroes is really just how I process and interpret comics just put on display, like how I relate to them, how is how I synthesize it into all of the other pop culture that I consume, and how there are all these connections to things that we enjoy. I don't know, like it's one of my favorite things to do, to just kind of find that through line to stuff that doesn't seem like it's related, but if you look hard enough, you can make anything related.
That is like sort of the beauty of like the way fans relate to superhero, and not to superhero, but to existing texts and shared universes.
Yeah,
we're always putting the pieces together.
Exactly, and I'm like, that's one of the best things about fan fiction.
Mm-hmm. But you're also sort of creating a release valve for the fact that so many of the stories just don't have spaces where you have Black superhero characters, who, especially not Black women, interacting with each other. Because of the sort of like, we have to have one of each approach to diversity, rather than like looking at it as part of like a holistic, aspect of storytelling about the world. You end up with teams where you're like, and here's the Black member, and here's the Latinx member, and then everybody else is white. And so you get sort of cheated out of having these stories where you have a range of Black women hanging out together. And you're like all about flipping the balance back on that, basically.
Yeah, because, even as a young reader, and definitely up until adulthood, like, it just always was weird to me that I don't know, like, especially the Black women weren't hanging out, because to me, like, you're in this predominantly white space, and just coming from STEM, like that whole entire career field would mirror kind of how the superhero universe is set up in DC and Marvel. But whenever there was a Black woman, or sometimes even a Black guy, that would come, like, be a new like research tech or postdoc or something in another lab, whenever we saw each other, or discovered each other, I should say, in the break room, was like oh, hey, you're here, so have lunch together and just kind of talk about our day and relate and stuff like that. So I'm like, that would be no different. So it was always weird to me that Monica and Misty wouldn't talk, or if they cross paths, while she's on the Avengers, and Misty is with the Defenders, or like Storm, and who was it that was the Stevie? Like, they had interactions in X-Men, but it wasn't like, it was like come as a little jealousy on Storm's part early on, because of Stevie's growing relationship with Kitty, but they didn't really hang out like that. And so I always just kind of found that a little weird, because I just culturally, I just know we like to, come together and, just kind of be in each other's spaces, especially if we are the only few in such a predominantly white space. So it just made sense to me, like, yeah, they would definitely hang out. They would be friends, or, nice nasty to each other sometimes, but like either way, like, they would at least have some type of relationship.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the fan response too is just like it's like a relief of like, finally we get to have greater depth in those relationships, and also just hearing them written and by a Black woman. And I'm sorry, what's the name of the artist on Living Heroes?
O'Neill Jones.
Yes, sorry. Is she Black as well?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So yeah, like, just bringing that to the work, like, there's so many misfires that we encounter as fans, and so many unforced errors.
Yeah.
So,
because for a lot of things that happen in Living Heroes, some of the stuff, like, O'Neill just added without me even having to say it outright, which I thought was nice. I would have known, like, with another artist, I possibly would have had to, like, explain or, like, provide very detailed references, which wouldn't have been a problem. It's just the thing of, sometimes if you have to explain something to that degree, then when it is interpreted, something's going to be missed, because it's just not innately there. But for her, like it's there. The most recent But What If Though entry that we did together was with Selena Kyle and Vixen, shopping for wigs while Vixen is on her lunch break from the Justice League. And the whole punchline of the entire thing is that they're trying on wigs and something happens and Vixen goes to go fight. Selena tells her to go ahead because why would Selena Kyle get involved in matters, superhero matters, when she doesn't have to? And because Vixen still had the wig on when she comes back in, the wig's still there. It hasn't budged. It still looks flawless. So, Selena's like, okay, she'll take one and I'll take one. And then Selena actually offers to pay. And like, when do you know Catwoman to pay for anything? And and Vixen's kind of like, oh, you pay for stuff? And Selena's like, yeah, I do. For when we're at black businesses, like we're at a black establishment. So that was something that I felt like, one would just be a cultural thing that folks would hopefully relate to. And I just thought it was a fun moment because, again, like these are just little things that, as a reader, I'm thinking of like what these characters are doing, in between the panels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I also just love like retroactively, some writers have addressed that Selena Kyle is, I believe it's like also mixed Cuban descent as well as Italian. And then it gets forgotten, by people who just assume everybody is white all the time. And, seeing your Selena, like obviously being Latina, is like, remember how this is a thing, you guys.
Yeah. Because you're right, and that's another thing. A lot of these characters have been along for decades, and that means there have been several different writers who have written them. And because comics are so extensive, and there's so many of them, a lot of those little tidbits, or large ones, get lost in the shuffle, because if one person fails to acknowledge it, and they do an entire, series, then that's the first thing that someone else encounters, then that is that's the canon. Even when they learn that actually wasn't the case early on, sometimes that first canon you encounter is the one that sticks with you the most. So I don't like that. I think that's why for me, like when I am reading comics, I tend to really enjoy reading the older ones, like the Silver Age and Bronze Age. Silver Age, I know, like, it's questionable, like, why on earth would you want to read that? Well, I mean, are there some stories that are cringy? Absolutely, but I don't know, like, the storytelling, also, like, the fact that the characters are, the Cape heroes are not in their suits the entire time, that from, like, the Silver, Bronze, and the Modern Age from, like, the 90s and the early 2000s, like, I just really enjoy, because like they are direct reflections of of the time that they were written in. Like the 90s, like I just really got into this thing, and I've been trying to find as many comics as I can that were written around the time as we were getting to the height of the crack epidemic. And I bring that up is because I just found it very interesting that for a lot of black characters that existed in that time period, they're all dealing with going into impoverished areas and like trying to clean up the crack epidemic, or locking up drug dealers and stuff like that. And it's just always interesting to me that is the only other time you really see these heroes save other folk, or quote unquote save other folks that look like them. My dad had asked me a couple of weeks ago, he was like, something, I was thinking about it, and when I was growing up, I never saw Superman save anybody that looked like me. And that kind of hit me because recently it was a Batwoman episode that made a point to talk about how important it was for black children of color to be saved or see themselves saved by heroes that look like them. Danny Lore talks a lot about this. Their Blade story in Marvel Voices Legacy is really centered on that. So, I don't know, like, it's just, I was thinking about that, and then, you know, the fact that there was just like this surgence of comics that feature Black characters finally going to areas with predominantly Black populations, but it was always because there was, like, you know, some drug infestation or something like that, and they were going there to clean up, you know, or attempt to clean up what was going on. And I just found that fascinating that that was the only time that I could really clearly remember, you know, seeing Black heroes save other Black people. Like, you know, it happens sporadically, but like during that pocket of time between like 90, I want to say like 92 to 94, it's just like, it is in abundance. It's so much so that the Punisher was actually Black for 3 issues.
Yep.
And yeah, with Luke Cage in Chicago. So yeah, very interesting comic. I will say that. Like, whenever I can't find something on Marvel Unlimited, like there's issues missing, I'm like on the hunt for those issues, because I'm like, why is this not on here? And usually it's because it's something like it's something that Marvel or DC would like to forget. Silver Sable, the Wild Pack was the most recent series that I read that was like almost basically all missing from Marvel Unlimited, and I found out why. It's not badly written. It's just it's not even a victim of its time. It's just a reflection of the time.
Well, it's funny, like, this is definitely not a podcast where one has to apologize for reading Silver Age comics. I mean, I'm always telling people, like, they need to read Kirby.
Yes.
And, you know, and Gene Colan, and, like, there's so many artists from that period that just produce such beautiful work. I mean, one of the questions that people sometimes ask me, though, you know, like, as a feminist, as a queer person, like, you know, how do I reconcile reading some of these older comics that do not represent people like me the way I would want them to be handled? Mm-hmm. And the thing is, like, for a lot of the ones that I love, it's obvious that the person is making an effort. And by the person, I usually mean the artist, not necessarily Stan Lee so much, surprisingly. Sorry, I have feelings on that. But
same.
Like, yeah. But, you know, but that just because I'm able to, like, read something that's sexist and have it not, like, bring me down and still be able to enjoy it doesn't mean that I presume that other people are going to have the same tolerance for it, or like willingness to engage with it, etc. So, you know, I mean, for me, like, being able to tell when someone's trying and when they're not is helpful. But I also definitely enjoy plenty of super sexist art when it comes to, like, for example, hair metal and, like, 80s music and 70s glam rock for people who aren't queer, etc.
Yeah.
And you know, you deal with it anyway. So I'm curious, like, when I talk to other people who are, like, not old straight white men who love comics from the Silver Age and from the Bronze Age, like, how do you process, like, because, like, never mind, like, the question of whether something is corny or not, but, like, when you encounter stories where you're like, well, that was fucked up, like, are you able, like, how do you still enjoy them, or, like, how does it make you feel about the work that you read?
So I can talk to that, like, right now. So just last week I had feelings of that from the Silver Sable and the Wild Pack, and this isn't even Silver Age, this is 90s. So, like, they basically Sable, Black Battlestar, and Battlestar is, like, on it, like, there's a racist hero on the team. I think he goes by the Crippler, which also
oh god, there's so many fucked up sexual, like, it was like somebody doesn't understand what SM is, but interesting effort there.
Yeah, and so that's a thing. And so they go to I think they go to, like, they're in LA. I think they're in Watts, if I'm not mistaken. So they're there because there's a gang war going on, and somehow somebody's boss is involved, and, like, the Black characters that are on Sable's team are, like, talking to the other Black characters, and it's all respectability politics. And it's just so cringe. And a lot of like some stuff I'm just like, oh my God. But the reason why I'm still able to reconcile with that, because the way that I view comics is just like as pieces of history. And there's stuff that I read in history books that piss me off all the time, but it does not change that they exist. And that's kind of the way that I work through my feelings about a comic that I'm reading. Is from the Silver Age. Like, they had Mantis and with some very terrible portrayals of an Asian character in that.
Oh, yeah.
But by reading, I'm just like, it's not, definitely not excusing it, but I'm like, yeah, this was written this way because of what was going on then. One, maybe someone just being very terrible, but also like I don't know, like I'm just thinking of impressions, like writers, we tell on ourselves all the time, even when we're not trying to. And it was just telling on maybe the common minds of folks around that time. So that character would be written that way by a white guy, probably. So right. I just kind of, I just think of it as, this is a thing that exists because this is unfortunately how folks were thinking or still think. It does not make it okay, but the fact that this does exist just further proves everyone's arguments and talking points about how deep something like systematic racism is, or just racism in itself, because it shines through in a lot of media that we consume. So it's really hard to continually gaslight someone to say that it's not about race when you see it reflected in the most innocent things. So I think that's just kind of how I work through it. I mean, also just like being a Black queer woman in fandom, when am I not offended? So it's I don't know, like I just try to lean into the stuff where, like you said, like you can tell that there's an attempt being made. And something about that, like something about knowing that someone like knew in their heart that, ooh, I can't do this thing, but I'm not really sure how else to write this. Let me go about this to the best way that I can. I think about Jack Kirby in the Black Romance comic that he was working on, and I read a couple of those, and they were beautifully written because he treated those characters like people.
Yeah. I mean, I also I have much less tolerance for it in art that's coming out right now.
Oh, absolutely.
It's so much clearer. I basically have no tolerance for that bullshit in art coming out right now, because there's no excuse for not knowing or understanding or trying to engage with people or having a sensitivity reader, etc.
Right.
But yeah, I also think, and I also feel like for me, there's certain times where I have a higher threshold for engaging with art that might be fucked up on some of those levels, and other times where I'm like, I can't deal with this right now, but maybe it was last time I read it, I was in a better headspace for it, and this time I'm reading it and I'm like, I need to read something that's less toxic right now, even if I enjoy it for a number of other reasons, for example.
Yeah, and I mean, there's been stuff where I just had no tolerance at all, and that was The Boys. I decided to go, I don't know why, but after watching the first season on Amazon, I knew that the comic was bad. I just didn't know how. Or troubling, I should say. And then I went and I started reading it, and I read it all the way through, and I was like horrified. Because one, this isn't from like the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. It's like, the 2000s. And it was, I couldn't even treat it as satire. It was just so egregious on so many levels that I just couldn't for the life of me understand how. Like, I knew how, but I just also still couldn't understand how. So many of these comics, and so much so that someone pitched this to, or someone at Amazon was interested enough and thought like, okay, let's do this, but figure out a way to like make it presentable for TV. And like, what a feat.
That's interesting. You're right, because it's like somebody had to have read the original material and made a decision that despite the ways it was fucked up, it was worth reinterpreting into a show that people might like. And to me, that feels different than doing that with Watchmen, right?
Yeah,
Like,
night and day. Because and actually Watchmen, I at first wanted no parts of it when I heard that was being made into a series, and then they wrote me in with Regina King, and I thought oh my god, what? That doesn't sound safe. What? What is going to happen? But they transformed that. I mean, Watchmen is definitely not The Boys or anything like that. I just wasn't sure how that was. I wasn't sure that it was how it was going to work for different reasons. But wow, I would have never saw that coming.
Yeah, the ways in which the original Watchmen series is sexist or not, beating you over the head bad. It's sort of more when you think about it, or rather than it wasn't starting from the same level of but it also here's this huge quote unquote most important graphic novel of the 20th century, and it had about America. It has nothing about blackness in it at all.
right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good point though about that decision to make The Boys. Speaking of the question of switching from what a comic might offer to what is being shown in a different medium, you obviously are a big fan of Monica Rambeau, as are a great number of people, and I had structured these questions actually to run in the opposite direction, but I'm going to do it this way because this is actually a better flow from TV adaptations. How did you feel about the way she was used or misused in WandaVision? And feel free to reference your own article, of course, which is a must read for folks.
So I'm rubbing my temples because what a journey for me. So when Monica Rambeau was first mentioned to be joining WandaVision, I had reservations because I had to back up a little bit. I was already peeved that Monica Rambeau had been introduced as a child in Captain Marvel. There's a reason for that. It's probably, and unfortunately for me, because I just know so much about the comic history and how those two characters ended up getting intertwined in a way that sucks for Monica. Because just as a black woman like her, the fact that she was this character that at one point was very involved with the Avengers. And I mean, not just showing up on the front of the comic or being on a few pages, very integral to the stories that were being told with them. And then she just has this regression that it was very aggressive between the 90s and a lot of the early 2000s. So to have her introduced, and then also she suffers from name changes, constant ones. So constantly having her her agency taken in a way or punished in a way, which was frustrating. When she takes the name Photon, it's after she had been mind controlled and sexually assaulted, and then doesn't even get to have any kind of retribution against her assaulter, because in that moment she has to be this character that will just passively extend forgiveness, which a whole nother podcast. But that was frustrating. So to have her then stuck into this Captain Marvel movie, I'm wow, so the way that this character is going to be introduced to the broader public is as a subordinate to this other character who now dons the name that she originally came into comics with. And it sucked because this is the first black woman with with superpower in the MCU. So that's huge. No shade or anything to the women of Wakanda, because they themselves are just powerful characters, but this is the first time we're getting a black woman with powers, so it's important. And to have her tucked, and also her mother tucked into Captain Marvel, in the way that her mom was used for Carol's growth and story, kind of peeved me too, because I'm you all didn't even bother. You've already made her a single mother, which is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But again, Monica was a character in the comics who had like a healthy relationship with their parents, and that is pretty rare. That is very rare for all characters, regardless of race. So that kind of sucked, but I was like, that's fine. I'm okay with, her being raised by a single mother. And I was like, well, maybe they'll develop a relationship between Maria and Carol, but they really don't. Like, they pull it. So not only do you change this character's, whole origin or whatever, but then you pull your punches and you don't even go for the whole enchilada and just, do a thing that would at least balance this out. So Monica gets introduced with WandaVision, and I'm like, okay, really not sure how this is going to work, but maybe. So when Monica comes on the screen as Geraldine, I'm like, okay, I'm cool with this, because, Teyonah Parris is just like such a amazing actress, and she lit up the screen, so it was great. And then episodes 4, 5, 6, 7, Monica Rambeau show. I mean, of course it's Wanda's show, but they really did a great job of propping the character up and giving her center stage for a side character, even bothering to give her her own villain, which was Hayward. So that, and then I was not happy about Maria being killed off, but it's like, okay, well, if they happen to do something with this grief for her, and give us some depth to her character or something like that, then maybe that's something that I can live with. And for a little while it seemed that way, that they had tied Monica, her pain or grief, and kind of paralleled it with Wanda in a way that these are two characters who have suffered tremendous loss, but they're on these two separate paths. How would those paths converge? And I was like, okay, I can kind of get with this. And then again, like, Monica is like doing things, she's involved in the same way that she was as a member of the Avengers. And then you have this really beautiful scene of her working her way through the Hex, reminding me of Fast Color. And I really love that movie. And it's just this black woman, fighting her way through, her pain and her grief, and pulling herself together and coming out whole. And also with powers. How beautiful is that? Nothing, it wasn't like a tragic accident, or, someone was shot and that's why she decided to become a hero or whatever. Like, it was just her working through her own thing to become a hero. And then the finale happened, and all that unraveled because, in episode 7, she gives this very passionate speech to Wanda about, she wouldn't change anything if she could, and that it's okay because it's hers, like, it is her. And I was like, oh, okay, so this maybe is how this would be a through line later for her to, like, finally, I don't know, like, help Wanda or, whatever. But no, the finale happened, and Monica was reduced to, unlike a lot of, unfortunately, Jimmy and Darcy, but it just sucked for Monica because they really made the effort to, kind of prop her up in those previous episodes, and had her so involved in, what happened with Wanda. So to have her stuck in a room with Ralph Boner for a little bit, and then to run out and step in the line of fire from Hayward. So that scene was irritating for several reasons. One, just because of the empty imagery of just this black character being impervious to bullets, when black people are just being slain left and right by folks that should be protecting them. And it was just kind of more of the same. Like, we got this with Luke Cage, at least they talked about it for a little bit, get this in Black Lightning with Thunder, and it's just like, okay, but who is this for? Because you just showed us that these children can handle their own. They just unarmed all of the military, and then you have a bullet whiz past Monica, and Billy stops it. So the whole entire series, Wanda has been taking microaggressions and dealing with misogynoir from Hayward. So, and then, just not kind of passively taking it. And then, you think maybe she'll finally have a moment where she can tell him off or put him in his place or take back her rightful place in this place that her mother has built from the ground up. But no, she literally takes more BS from him physically and passively with those bullets passing through her, and he gets to go away in cuffs. It was frustrating. And then to have her be, the one to absolve Wanda's conscience at the end, to tell her like, hey, I would have done the same thing if given the same powers, when you just told her in episode 7 that you wouldn't have changed anything. Was frustrating, because then that told me that the writers maybe weren't really sure what to do with this character by the time we got to the finale, and they needed to change things because of COVID. And like, I understand that, but it just sucks because there was, as easy as it was for them to have the bullet thing, they could have had Monica finally face Hayward, and tell him off or something. Like, she'd been dealing with that the whole entire season, and that's all we get that's all she gets, is him taken away in cuffs, and for her to kind of tell Wanda like, hey, it's okay, they'll forgive you, now go be free.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. It was so needed to be said. And I don't like people saying like, well, look, you had so many things we can say about Monica's character, so the show was great for Black women. I'm like, no, this is giving people a lot of reasons why they needed to have more Black women making decisions in the script determinations. Yes. Because there were so many moments, like when I had Nikki J on the podcast for my WandaVision roundtable last time, and she pointed out like, it seemed like the show didn't realize that having Wanda push Monica back and say, you don't belong here, like, is particularly dangerous when you're talking to a Black woman. And the show didn't seem to realize that. Like, at first she's like, oh, they're going to do something interesting. And then it's like, nope, they didn't do something interesting with it because they are too white to be aware of this problem.
Yeah. And that was so like, frustrating. And it was just so frustrating because it was that. And then you kept, and I felt like, had the series been bingeable, because I feel very differently about Monica being in WandaVision now than I did week by week. Week by week, I was living for it, because it was like, even the small transgressions I was willing to forgive, because I was like, okay, there will be something to at least make this pay off or whatever, and it just never came, and it fell flat. And I know, like, had I been able to, like, if we would have been able to binge it, I feel like a lot of us would feel very differently about WandaVision. Not saying that it wouldn't be as good as it was, because I still think that it was good. Great even in some moments, especially for Wanda, but if I would have been able to binge it, then I would have called BS from jump. Like, as soon as I finished it and got to that finale, I was like, oh, this was absolutely terrible. And the scene, episode 7 would have not meant anything. Episode 4, when she wakes up, and the whole blip sequence would have been meaningless. So partly I'm happy that it was a week to week thing, because at least those moments that were really, really great for Monica, they aren't soured as much from the finale. They're still soured, but not as much if I would have been able to binge it, because it just would have turned the whole thing bad.
Oof, well, thank you for reminding everybody the ways in which Monica Rambeau, and ergo also the viewers, deserved better on that point. And, Monica is the character that you focused on in your Marvel's Voices legacy story. Like, why do you feel like she's such a compelling character? And it's interesting because she's like, she's not someone who was originally created by Black women, but is someone that was just really embraced, though.
So I've talked about this with a lot of friends that are Black and read comics, and how for a lot of us, even if the character is not created by a Black person, we still find ways to relate to them. And for Monica, because there's a lot of self-projection that goes into this. That's why a lot of folks go up for characters that they probably normally wouldn't, but because the character is not necessarily a blank canvas, but has enough relatable features, because even though created by a white character, because of the way that that person might view their interactions with black folks, we know what that is in real life, and we can see that, spot it, and there's relation to be found there. So with Monica, her origin story specifically, like the fact that she's passed up on this promotion that she obviously deserves, but her boss is, you know, like the sexist jackass who, you know, doesn't see her worth, that's relatable. You know, what is it? My grandmother or my mother always said, you know, you work twice as hard to get half as much. Olivia Pope's father has said that in Scandal, and it's something that a lot of black folks have heard a lot. And it reminded me of that. Even though he was black, it's fine. It still, it was still relatable, because even still, you know, all skin folk and kin folk, so that was still very true. So to see that, and for her to still become a captain of sorts, even better than before, because now she has powers, and for her to, you know, choose to be a hero because that's what she desired. Like, I just love that. It was so different from an Amanda Waller who ends up being pushed into politics because, you know, nearly all her family is slain. It was different from, you know, Aurora Monroe, who ends up becoming Storm because she loses her parents in a tragic accident, and, you know, is pickpocketing on the street when Xavier comes and extend her an invitation, you know, to his mansion to become a superhero. You know, her life in exchange for room and board. It's different from a Misty Knight it's different from a Misty Knight who ends up, you know, becoming who she is because she, you know, is on the clock and there's a terrorist bomb and she throws it, but unfortunately, her arm is blown off from it. It's different from that. There was just something very regular and could be anyone's experience on their day job that I just found very relatable to Monica. And then after that, as she joins the Avengers, and the way that, you know, she just gets her powers, but you couldn't tell because she already knows how to, you know, to do different things and do them well. Something I could also relate to, because for the electron microscopy job I had, I didn't know anything about it, but I had to learn about it as quickly as I could, because it was what was demanded of me. So just, you know, always being on your P's and Q's so you don't give anybody any excuse to question while you're there. It's just something that has been like a defense mechanism for me as I've been in predominantly white spaces. Still, like, I got it. I get it. Even still, you know what you're doing. You're well at it. You still get questions. So, and she dealt with that. With Thor questioning whether or not she really was fit to be a leader of the Avengers, even though Captain America was the one who said, "Hey, Monica, do you want to do this?" So for me, she was just one of those characters that I could really see those human elements shine through, and not like they didn't exist in the other women, but for Monica, I didn't have to shift through a lot of stuff to get to it. It was just like right there on the page.
So she's the character who you told your Marvel's Voices story about. What's it like working on one of those Voices anthologies? It
was fun. I freaked myself out for 2 hours for no reason, because I was like, oh crap, like what story will I tell? And then I thought about it, and I'm just like, okay, you have 2 pages. You've already been, you know, training yourself up for this, because both Parenthood Activate and but What If throw in several stories, and Living Heroes is like 1 or 2 pages. So like, you can do it. Like, you can figure this out. And I was like, just tell a relatable story. That's something that, you know, you lean into a lot and is true to you. And so just do it. So I thought about the time that my grandmother had me go into the store. I think it was like, I don't know, like 19 or 20, for some condensed milk, Pet's milk. And I, due to ego and pride, walked around the store for like 40 something minutes trying to find it, until I finally broke down and asked someone like, hey, where is this located? And then I thought about the time, like how relatable it is to like shop with someone and for them to like leave you as you get closer to the checkout aisle. Especially, yeah, like especially being younger and like, you know, your mom or a loved one does that and you're just kind of like, okay, like where are you? Because I don't have any money and we got to pay for this and we're almost here. So I just thought it would be fun to have that, to call back to the relationship that Monica has with her parents, to call back to, you know, the time that she's been with the Avengers and the, you know, her interactions and friendship with Thor and She-Hulk. I just thought that would be a really fun time to just kind of call back to that and get as many jokes as I could in, as well as a nice tender moment at the end.
Yeah, it's a very, very funny and good and tight little story there, full of panels that are very, very memeable. Like, you know, your background in doing webcomics together definitely shows through. Like, yep, going to take a picture of that. But I'm curious with, like, the voice structure. Do they say to you, like, hey, you can write a story about any character you want, and it can be about anything you want?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they did.
Wow.
So for this particular one, it was just like, hey, you're free to write about who you want to write about. So I didn't even have to choose Monica. I just wanted Monica. And like had Monica been taken, which I was like, oh, thank God she wasn't, I probably would have ended up doing a story with Beast and Wonder Man. I just love them as best friends. Yeah, like I love them as yeah, like as wingmen to each other. Like I think I would have had them like at the club or something, or like at someone's concert, trying to like, I don't know, pick up folks or just whatever. Like I would have done something fun in that regard. Like them trying to get to the club before 11 because mutants are free before 11, but Wonder Man ends up having to pay because it's like, oh wait, you're not a mutant. Just something goofy like that.
Mm-hmm. But that's so interesting, though, because, like, so often when people are, you know, coming in to do their first stories for Marvel or DC, it's like, we want you to, like, this is the character you can do, and this is, like, the sort of genre we're looking to fill, like, what's your pitch for it? And also you have, like, you know, you have a number of issues that you can do. This is sort of the flip. It's like, you can do anything you want, but you have 2 pages.
Yeah. And it's just like, pick your poison, because either one can feel, like, daunting. So just switching gears to now the story that I'm writing for DC Comics for the Wonder Woman Black and Gold anthology, it's kind of more of the same. It was like, hey, so you can't pick just any character, but you can pick from these characters. And it's just like mainly like Diana, Nubia, Artemis, you know, whoever, whatever Amazons, even her mom, it didn't matter, just like within the realm of the mascara. And for that one, the moment that I heard that, I was like, okay, so can I do Nubia and Diana in the same story? So the moment I got the okay for that, I was like, I know exactly the story that I want to tell, because one, it was always like a thing to me that Nubia is like, exists in DC, but didn't really have much of a history. Like she pops up here and there, but it's not enough to like get a feel for who Nubia is outside of being either one, this other Wonder Woman, which grinds my gears, or, you know, the Black Wonder Woman. So I thought about like the first encounter and how they kind of leave things off in Wonder Woman 206. Like, you know, there was possibility for them to either develop a friendship or to meet again, maybe work together or something like that, but it never really happens. And then like the other times that they've kind of crossed paths with one another, it's been, you know, a little more, I don't know, like more static between them. Like there isn't much sisterly love all the time. And the story that I wanted to tell was like, no, I would actually love if these two, you know, found some common ground, or like figured out like if they work together that they're best, because they're both Wonder Woman. Like they can exist at the same time, and it doesn't have to be a thing of one is better than the other or any of that. Like they are, they're sisters. So like, what does that look like? And how does it look if Hippolyta is treating both of them like the daughters that she loves so much? So that's kind of what my story is based around. And I have a whole 8 pages this time. So I was like, ooh, I can finally let the story, like I can let the story breathe. And I was funny enough found inspiration from a Captain America comic of all things, Captain America 354 to be exact. And that's the one where there's a story of Steve Rogers and the reintroduction of John Walker as Jack Daniels whiskey as U.S. agent. And I just really love the way that that story is told. Not the story itself, but like I love the way that it's told, like the way that the pages are used in the panels, because you have this dual story happening with Steve Rogers and what he has going on as Cap again, and then as the government reintroduces like this new Jack Daniels U.S. agent for them to use, and like how every move mirrors one another, but the story is different for each character. And I loved it because I'm like, maybe that's something that I can use for the story between Diana and Nubia. So I don't like that. That's just fun to me to like get inspiration from like different stories from a character that has absolutely nothing to do with another character, and like mix it in with other things from, my own thoughts and experiences and other things that I've seen in pop culture. Like, I don't know, like, it just feels, it's exciting, and just really cool. And I just think of Dwayne McDuffie and, a quote of his that I just love, and it's like, my fan fiction is canon. And I need to get that printed or put it on a pen or something like that so I can like look at it daily, because like you think about it, so many writers who have written characters that we love or can't stand, like that's their fan fiction and it's canon now.
That's really interesting. That's an amazing quote. And it's so many levels, because like there's so many things that fans have decided about comics or stories that have eventually trickled back up to the people who are getting paid to put them in the page. But our theories are no less valid. I mean, and what another things I love about your DC comic is that I've literally heard multiple fans say, I really want there to be a story where Wonder Woman and Nubia like reconcile with like them both being where Diana and Nubia reconcile with them both being Wonder Woman simultaneously. And like, so you're writing the thing that everybody's been asking for. Yeah,
because like it just feels like it would make sense, because if you think about it, like the Amazons, like the sisterhood of it all, like the Amazons and the Dora Milaje to me are two sides of the same coin. And that's actually one of the things that drew the editor at DC to me. She was reading my Dora Milaje piece, the one that I wrote first, the first thing that I ever wrote for Fangirls, and thought like, okay, like, wow, you would have a great grasp on the Amazons. I'm like, yeah, because I kind of view them the same. Like I've always felt that the Amazons at the time had more depth to them than the Dora Milaje, but now Dora Milaje, since Black Panther and a little before then, in some comics, they became like fully realized characters outside of, their loyalty to T'Challa. So, it just never made sense. Like, I get that Diana's competitive. I get that Nubia would be competitive, but like at the same time, like I feel like there would still be a strong enough sisterly bond if that was something that was just fed into, because like, they can stand arm in arm together. I think that's a more powerful thing to have that than to, have Nubia trying to best Diana, or Diana trying to best Nubia. Like, why not? Like some actual solidarity, because if Themyscira is supposed to be like this better reflection than man's world, then, why are some of the things that, affect, these spaces in man's world reflected in Themyscira? Like, that just feels a little dishonest. Or maybe it is honest, and maybe that's something that we need to start talking about.
That's so true, though. Like, the whole thing is supposed to be an exercise in thinking about other ways of being, and too often people just haven't taken up that mantle in their writing of the character. That's one of the reasons why the whole like, what if the Amazons are actually all violent and have been killing all the sons, like thing from the New 52 was so like, have you not been paying attention? Like, I'm not saying that that a women-run society is going to be perfect. Lord knows it isn't. But that seems like an exact copy of the way things are fucked up in men's worlds. So maybe think a little bit more creatively.
Right, like what's wrong with that? It's fiction, so like what harm could there be to have something written that way versus something that is just so brutally violent? Why can't I don't know, like a more loving, better way exist? Why couldn't a superhero be amazing just based off of love and support? Why would a superhero have to be amazing because they've been through so many traumatic things and that's what shaped and molded them? Like, I'm a firm believer that, you know, someone can be just as wonderful from, you know, a nurturing environment than someone who was forced to, you know, be as amazing as they are because of a harsh one.
Yeah. I could get into a whole side conversation around my feelings around the New Gods and certain retellings of them recently based on that, but I will spare people. You've probably witnessed some of this on social media.
I have and felt that way too, because I actually have a grand affinity for Mr. Miracle and Big Barda. Like, they are my favorite couple. I'm in love with Jack Kirby's run, and the one that came right after it in the 70s, because I don't like for two characters to come from something like Apocalypse and still find the goodness in one another, and also feel that they are deserving of that. Like, they are deserving of each other's love and everything, regardless of how tough their life was. It's something that I love. Like, there can be a revolution in love. And when they go back and Barda like splits Granny Goodness lip or kills her every now and again, like, it's all right, because they just go back home and they have dinner and it's fine.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. Let my listeners know, where can they follow your comics, and where can they pick up your work online, and when is your DC comic going to be out too?
All right, so you can follow me online at Steph_I_Will. That is for Twitter and Instagram. You can also go to my website, whysteph.com, WHYSTEPH, where you can find some of my features from different websites. Also links to all of my comics, including Marvel Voices Legacy. And as far as the DC comic is concerned, I'm not sure. It's either August or September. I'm not sure yet how they're releasing, because there are 6 issues total. I am the 4th issue, and the first issue drops in June. So
gotcha.
I'm thinking, if it's a monthly thing, I'm thinking September then, possibly. But before the year is over, definitely. And before snow is on the ground. Well, with climate change, who knows?
Well, I really encourage folks to go. I got the digital copy of Living Heroes because I saw it and then I seen it. I needed it right now, and I didn't want to make anybody have to go to the mailbox. But like, folks can order a print copy. You can download the PDF right now. These are both awesome options. And, you know, really, we can go and support and like read your work on Webtoons as well for What If Though. But What If Though, sorry. No, such a fun play on the What If, yes, on the What If comics concept. Like,
yes, which I love so much.
So yeah, I really cannot overemphasize how great your stuff is and how much I want fans to listen to it. And I feel like a lot, you know, fans talk about like, where are the stories where characters are interacting with each other, but like in real human ways. And there's also humor to it, and it also feels like it was written now as opposed to like written in the distant past. And like, you're providing it. So thank you for that. And to my listeners, there is indeed more Deep Space Dive podcast coming your way soon. I have not forgotten our DS9 podcast. There is more to come. I also have some really exciting interviews coming up, including with a comics letterer, which is definitely a topic that I think more people in comics need to understand and be aware of, and more interviews with amazing writers and artists. As well as for me, you can find me on Twitter a little bit too much at ELANA_Brooklyn. That's Elana_Brooklyn. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games. you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.